camera turned off.
Yes.
Tonight I am, as Jawan said, going to be sharing a new talk that I put together just for this called Finding Joseph's Family, Using Reverse Genealogy to Piece Together a Family Puzzle. I will kind of be explaining myself a little bit as we go along. My hope when I came up with the idea for this, when Jawan reached out and said, well, you have anything for us this summer? And I didn't really have anything brand new, but at the time I was kind of in the middle of wrapping up the project for Wake Forest University. And there was just one particular family that you're about to hear about that I had felt a lot of success with, but also drove me crazy. And I thought it might be beneficial to other researchers to just hear some of the processes, some of the thinking, some of the analysis that went on during this project. So that's what I'm trying to share with you tonight. So let's get started. And yes, I'm already gonna go crazy with the admit thing popping up, so forgive me on that. I do ask that you don't take photos, screenshots, or video of this slides in this presentation because it will be available on the William and Mary Lemon Project website, and you can go back and play it as many times as you want to. But because of the changing nature of this research, I just don't want anybody sharing out particular screens or slides, and that information could change with the drop of a hat. My objective today is really, as I just said, to share some of the genealogical research conducted on one man and his family, and to demonstrate the methodology and the thought processes that were used. This research was part of a project focused on identifying descendants of 16 enslaved humans who were endowed to the Wake Forest Institute, now University, by planter John Blunt in 1836 and were sold by the college's trustees in May of 1860. Just to give you a little background, according to the History of Wake Forest College by George Washington Paschal, Shawan County planter John Blunt left his estate to Wake Forest Institute, now University, in his 1836 will to be sold upon the death of his wife to create an endowment for that institution. An auction of 16 enslaved persons from the Blunt estate was organized by the treasurer of Wake's Board of Trustees and was held on May 7th, 1860. Now, again, this is according to the writing of George Washington Paschal. I was engaged as a professional genealogist to identify descendants of the 16 enslaved humans sold with the ultimate goal of discovering living descendants. This project required the use of reverse genealogy. Now, if you're not familiar with reverse genealogy, that is the practice of starting with information about a known ancestor and then researching forward in time, coming towards the present instead of going backwards toward the past with an effort to find that person's descendants. When I was brought into this project, this is the information I was given. I had the names of 13 of the enslaved persons. I had the names, at least as transcribed by Paschal, of the purchasers from the auction, and then I had the amount that they were purchased for. Now, I know you may be curious about the project in general, and you can search for YouTube for a talk that I give that is all about the whole project, but our focus for tonight is going to be on this individual, Joseph, who was purchased coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, by someone named Joseph Madry for the price of $700. So, in an effort to find Joseph, my research focus again was to identify descendants of Joseph who was sold for $700 by the trustees of Wake Forest University in May 1860. The initial questions that guided my research were, was the purchaser Joseph Madry, or perhaps spelled Mardre, from? And where did he live and own property at the time of the sale? Now, most of you listening probably know already that if you are researching someone who was either known to be enslaved or thought to be enslaved, one of the first steps that you must take is to find who the slave owner, or in this case, the purchaser, was, to find that person's records in order to hopefully find guiding information about the formerly enslaved person that you are researching. And so all I had about this Joseph Madry was his name. There was no additional information given about the purchasers. I also, in order to come forward in time, was going to need to find out what surname did Joseph take after emancipation. I needed to know where Joseph came from. Was he born to one of the enslaved persons who were named in the 1836 inventory that I'm going to show you in a few minutes? Or did John Blunt's widow acquire him in some other way? And then I needed to find a record of Joseph's sale. The history of Wake Forest says that there was an auction. Was it a public auction, or sales that were handled individually or privately? Finding a record of the sale might give me additional information, like Joseph's age and perhaps who some of his family members were. So to get started with this project, I first needed to figure out where the purchasers came from, or in this case, where Madry came from, because in order to find records about him, I have to know where he lived. I have to know what county or what state I should be researching in. So we start off with a rather unusual situation in that Wake Forest Institute was located here where you see the red star in Wake County, North Carolina, in the town of Wake Forest. However, the planter, John Blunt, who left his estate to Wake Forest, lived all the way over here in northeastern North Carolina in Chowan County, and that is where the 16 enslaved persons were located. Another little twist to this is that almost 100 years after this sale, Wake Forest University actually moved to Forsyth County, to the town of Winston-Salem, where it is located now. So in this rather unusual situation for descendant research, or even for any type of enslaved research, we have no physical relationship between the location of the enslaved and the location of the school. The enslaved were here in Chowan County. Now, it's important that we set the scene and frame a timeline for any research, genealogical research that we're doing. We must have context for the time and the place that we're researching. And so that is what I started out doing, beginning with May 7th, 1860, which was the stated date of this sale or this auction that supposedly took place. It doesn't say where it took place, but my assumption was that it probably took place in Chowan County, where the enslaved were located. Now, just 11 months later was the start of the Civil War, and doing this project required me to really research and study what was happening in this area of North Carolina during the years of the Civil War. I can tell you that there was a complete upheaval of this community in northeastern North Carolina, partially because of its location to so many waterways, and also because of its proximity to Fort Monroe, Virginia, and areas that were open to contraband, which were enslaved people who took their freedom in their own hands and self-emancipated. Also important to note was that in February of 1862, the waterfront town of Edenton became Union occupied. And then the following year, in October of 1863, the entire county and surrounding counties in northeastern North Carolina were Union occupied. This resulted in many enslaved persons, or I should say formerly enslaved persons, escaping behind Union lines, joining the Union Army, joining the Union Navy, which many had already done before this, and also getting word about and moving their families into contraband camps, either around Fort Monroe, Virginia, or on Roanoke Island. The white property owners in this area were also leaving. They were fleeing and abandoning their properties, and in some cases, they took the enslaved with them. In other cases, they left the enslaved on the properties unmonitored. Now, we know that January 1st, 1863 was the date of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, or the date it was to go into effect. This had absolutely no effect in the state of North Carolina. The enslaved persons were not set free on that date, although, as I've already mentioned, they were taking measures in many cases to emancipate themselves. And this is very important because I don't know whether or not Joseph may have taken that opportunity, as well as any of the other 16. April 9th, 1865 was the end of the Civil War, and then December 6th, 1865 was the formal ending of slavery with the passing of the 13th Amendment. So this is and I forgot to hit these each time, sorry. This is the frame for timeline that we're going to be building for Joseph, so that I know, hopefully, how to identify him after emancipation based on what I can learn about him during this period of time before formal emancipation, and anything I might be able to find out about him previous to the 1860 auction or sale. Now, I want to get this out of the way because I know during the Q&A, if I don't talk about this, people are going to ask me certain questions. So I want to let you know, those of you who do this work, you're probably thinking, oh, they gave her a date for, well, she should be able to find papers or bill sale or broadsides that tell about this auction that's going to take place. Well, I want you to know that I have not found a single records about any auction, any individual sales, any private agreements, or anything of the sort. The only mention that I have of this is one newspaper clipping that states that John Blunt's estate had given $12,000 to Wake Forest, but it doesn't even say anything about a sale of slaves or anything else. So all of that kind of documentation that those of you who do this know I should be seeing, haven't seen it anywhere. If you decide to dig in and you find it, please let me know. Okay, but I do have a little bit of evidence. And the first piece of evidence that I have is the will of John Blunt. So John Blunt died in 1835, and his will was began to be proven in 1836. We're only going to talk about the relevant parts of his will, otherwise we would be here all night. So in the 6th clause of his, he states, I give and devise to my wife Rebecca, you Negroes, Harry, Jim, the infant child, Mary, Emma, and Lettice, during her natural life and after her death to be disposed of as hereafter designated. So these 7 enslaved persons are left to his wife in that 1835 will. You do not see a Joseph, just make note of that. So he says, as hereinafter designated. In the 8th clause of, he says, after Rebecca's death, that his administrator is to pay over the entire income of the sale of his estate to the trustees of the Wake Forest Institute and their successors forever. So that was the deal. As long as Rebecca was alive, she had, as soon as she died, everything was to be sold, including his enslaved property, and the money was to go to Wake Forest to start a fund for young men who wanted to go into the ministry, because Wake Forest was a Baptist and still is a Baptist college. Now, the one thing I do have that has been extremely helpful is this is the inventory that is with non-blessed stores, and although it is not dated, it is inferred that this was the inventory of his property at the time of his death. So you can see that it starts off with, his cattle and his farm equipment and all that kind of stuff. And even some axes and tools and plows and things. And then it says, and the following Negroes, and there are 17 Negroes who are named. So we only have 7 that he says are left to his wife, Rebecca, but there's 17 in all. And out of the 7, only the 5 that you see with the blue dots are part of the Wake Forest 16 in 1860. Now, this is not really about Joseph, but I just want to let you know that we only have 5 out of these 17 that are part of the estate that are sold in 1860. What I do want to point out is that there's no Joseph. Why is that important? This lets me know that Joseph either was born after this date or he was acquired in some other way by Rebecca Blunt before 1860. So since I don't have an age for Joseph, this was, kind of like a piece of analysis that I had to do to try to determine, well, what could his age have been? What, when I'm starting to look for a Joseph, what age should I be looking for? So I believe that Joseph was born sometime after 1836. The interesting thing about this inventory is, though, even though it represents what John Blunt had in 1835, someone has put notations on here about people who died in the fall of 1836. So I think it's current at least into the fall of 1836, and there's no mention of a Joseph. So, what are some of the first steps to take in a situation like, as I've already mentioned, you want to identify the purchaser. Now, I do want to say that this used to kind of be the be-all, end-all. The first thing you're going to do is try to find the enslaver. But some people today are taking a little bit of different approach, because we have at our fingertips many Reconstruction era records that are available for us to go ahead and start trying to find the person, the enslaved person or the former enslaved person during Reconstruction. That would be like Freedmen's Bureau records, Freedmen's Bank records, Claims Commission, and even records related to United States Colored Truth. So if that's your approach, that's absolutely fine. But what I did first is tried to find a purchaser who I had a name for. He for $700 to somebody named Joseph Madry, and that person also purchased Pompey. And the reason that was helpful to me to know is because Pompey was the highest valued individual slave person Blunt estate. He was sold for $13 by himself. So that told me that Pompey was probably a man in his prime age for work. So that means maybe he's in his maybe mid or to mid 20s or so is what I'm thinking about Pompey. So if I compare that to the $100 for Joseph, it makes me think that Joseph is not a full-grown man in 1860, that he's probably maybe a pre-adolescent or adolescent boy, maybe, just in my mind, maybe 12, 13, 14 years old. He's valued enough that he can do some work, but he's not valued like a full-grown man. And remember, I'm having to make these inferences and come to these conclusions because the age of Joseph is not given to me. So I start looking for this Joseph Maddrey, and I did find the name Joseph Maddrey, T. Maddrey, in Northampton County, North Carolina. As I researched him, I learned that he was heavily involved in the town leadership in Northampton County and that he had a wife named Mary L. Maddrey. I was not able to come up with what the L stood for. And it's important that you're going to hear me name the wives because that's one of the ways I'm able to distinguish between people who have the same name, is what their wife's name was. So I studied this Joseph Maddrey. He, learned as much about him. But the problem with Joseph Maddrey is he was on the 1860 slave schedule as an enslaved. And if this sale took place at the beginning of May, the enumeration date was June 1st, 1860 for the slave schedules. And so anyone who owned enslaved people on June 1st should be on the slave schedules. Juwan, I keep getting a message that my connection is unstable. Is everything on your end?
You're breaking up a little bit at times, but not to the point where it's disruptive for me. You're still, I can still hear you very well.
Okay, great. Let me know if that changes and I can get off the hotel's internet maybe and get on my own or something on my phone. Okay, so there's no Joseph Maddrey anywhere in the state of North Carolina on the 1860 slave schedule. There is an A.J. Maddrey who also lives in Northampton County, but he's only 18 years old. He owns 3 enslaved persons, and the only male is a 7-year-old. So I'm like, that's kind of a stretch. I mean, his middle name might be Joseph, but I'm not 100% sure that a 7-year-old child would have brought $700 at that point in time. And I also am not sure, according to the way the list was, I'm not sure a 7-year-old would have been named because the other 3 children are not named on the list. They just say and child. So I held on to this, I dug as deep as I could and held on to it. What I noticed as I was doing this is that I kept seeing this name, Mardre, Mardre, and popping up, when I was searching for Maddrey. So I said, well, let me look into that. And it turned out that right in Chowan County, there was a Joseph Maddrey, and he appeared often in all kinds of records. If you put his name in on Ancestry or Family Search, you're going to get all kinds of hits for he's involved in. I mostly noticed that he handled or was named in a lot of different estates in Chowan County. His wife was Joyce Small. So I researched this Joseph very consistently and deeply, but found no records related to a purchase of any enslaved person or, sale or whatever. And I forgot to mention when I was talking about the first Joseph Maddrey, if you see my little map here, here's Northampton County, all the way at the top of the state of North Carolina, right at the Virginia border. It's a few counties away from Chowan. It's not impossible that he might not have heard about the sale and wanted to make a purchase, or he could have had a family connection or something like that. But I just didn't see it as probable. And then he's also equally far away from the location of where the Wake Forest Institute was at the time. So just wanted to show that visual. Okay. Then I went to follow the lead on some more of the people named Joseph Mardre with the M-A-R spelling. And in Clemens County, which is right next to Chowan County, there was a father and a son named Joseph Mardre. The father actually died in 1859, right before Rebecca Blunt died. She died in November. He died a couple months before that. He did have an estate file. There was no mention of enslaved people in his estate file. However, his son, Joseph Marjorie, was 29 years old in 1860, prime age to, be getting his life on as an enslaver. He was married twice, first to a Sarah Leary, and secondly to a Margaret Vale. This Joseph, sometime in the late 1860s, actually declared lunatic by the courts. He also seems to be the same Joseph Marjorie who was found in Orange County documents way over beyond the center of the state. It took me a while to figure it out that it was him, but eventually I did get to some documents mention the family back in Perquimans County so that I knew that it was the same Joseph. So I studied all of these men quite exhaustively and never found any mention of any purchase of any slaves from the Blunt estate or anything except one document that I'll show you soon that suggested that they may not have had Joseph in their stead. So, since I felt a little unsuccessful with finding the slave owner, I turned my focus. Oh, I forgot to tell you, these are some of the other spellings of this Marjorie or whatever sounding name that came up in the record. So you can see that there was a lot going on with that name. But anyway, I turned my attention to looking for Joseph. And since I didn't know anything else to go by, I looked for him with the Blunt surname. Now, hopefully you know by now that not all enslaved people took the surname of their last or even previous owner. But in this case, I did find one Joseph Blunt in the 1870 census for Edenton, Chowan County, North Carolina. This Joseph was 25 years old. That was the age he reported, which gives him a birth year somewhere around 1845. Now, remember, I told you he was not one of the original Blunt slaves, that he had to have been born sometime after 1836, unless Rebecca had acquired him in a different way. So this was very supportive of the theory and hypothesis that I was beginning to build about this person for whom I knew nothing but a first name. I also see that he is with a wife, and he's right here where this dot is, but I didn't really expect you to be able to see it that well. He's enumerated with a wife named Esther, and over here it tells you that they were just married in March of 1870. And also significant is the fact that occupation at the time was waterman. And so I'll come back to that later about why that was such an important piece of information for me. So I began to study this particular Joseph. I still don't know that he is the Joseph from the sale, but it's worth looking into. So as I continued to research him, I did find that marriage record for Joseph B. Blunt, and you do begin to see him often with the middle initial B, although I have not found what it stands for. Joseph B. Blunt marries Hester Lowther at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Edenton on April 27th, 1870. Now, I know the census said March, but March and April are really close together, and all of the rest of this matches. Joseph, Hester, they're a month difference. So one of the records is right, one of the records is wrong. The register shows Joseph's mother as Emma Blunt. So here's Joseph, here's Hester, his father, not known, his mother, Emma Blunt. Well, I don't know if you remember, but on that inventory, there was an Emma. And if you look at Emma in 1835-36, she is noted to be a girl. So you have man, you have boy, you have girl, you have old woman, and several old women, and then you go back and you have girl. Mary, Emma, and Fanny, who has passed away, are girls at that time. So I know that sometimes our enslaved ancestors are referred to as boy and girl when they're adults, but the context that I see on this inventory, the fact that they distinguish between the men and the boy Tom, they distinguish between the old woman and the girls. I believe that Emma was probably too young to be called a woman, but too old to be called like a child, or just, for it to just say child with no name or something like that. So in my mind, I'm thinking Emma is pre-childbearing age, probably adolescent or prepubescent, I would say, 9, 10, 11 years old. That's what I'm thinking about Emma. Now we know that Joseph was born around 45. So if Emma happens to be about 10 years old here, by 1845, she's prime age to be having children. So I put that in my pocket. Could I be looking at the Emma from the sale, because she is one of the 5 that's still there in 1860? Could I be looking at her, and could she be the mother of Joseph? So the next thing that I started doing is tracking Joseph down in the census. So we've already seen him in the 1870 census. In 1880, he's still in Edenton. There he is with his wife, Hester. And now they have 3 children in the home: Emma, who's named after his mother, Ida, and Elmira. We see him in 1900 living in the home of someone named Isaac Owens. Now, I know you didn't get to catch all the names of the 16, but one of them was an Isaac. And Isaac, I have documentation for. He was already a man in 1836. So if you look at his age here, he's 61. I can't help but wonder if this is not the same Isaac, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So I'm going to leave that alone. Joseph is living in the home with this Isaac Owens. And I don't know at the time that I first encountered this, where Hester was and the children. In 1910, he's still in Edenton. He has another wife, Louisa. And in 1920, he's still in Edenton, and he has another wife, a third wife, Victoria. So we're going to come back and talk about all of that. Okay, I'm going to skip that. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm sorry. So the little timeline for Joseph: we know when he was sold, who he was sold to. We knew he married and when he got married, or around when he got married. We now know that his mother's name was Emma Blunt, and we see him in all the censuses that I just showed you. But where was Hester? Well, Hester in 1900 was in Norfolk, Virginia. She had her daughter Elmira. I know you can't see the name, but I'm going by the birth, so I know that that's probably Emma. She has a granddaughter, Margaret Bell. And this says she has a son, Joshua Blunt, who it says was born in May of 1870, which would have been right after they got married, but before the 1870 census. And he was not on that 1870 census. So this gave me another direction to go in, figure out, who is this Joshua? Is he really their son? Where was he? Why wasn't he on the 1870 census? And all of that. So as you're going to begin to see, every new record leads to new questions, new research, and then hopefully to new records. So this is why you have to keep track of your research. You have to write everything down or type everything in. You build a timeline, all those things, and you need to keep a research log. I have a 62-page research log for work that I was doing for Wake Forest. The other thing I noticed here is that Hester says she has had 4 children. So that would be the 3 girls plus Joshua. But she says only 3 of them are living. So that gave me something else to have to try to track down, but I can tell you that it's a lie because all the children were living at that time. All right, so this, what you see on the left is the same timeline that you've been looking at already. I needed to find out where Hester and the children were in 1900. Well, what you see on the right is a summons for Joseph, who is being sued by the state for threatening his wife Hester and their children, which he has begotten upon her. And this is from 1894. But in the document, Hester says he left them in 1892 and has been gone ever since. He was indicted in spring of 1895. I have all the court paperwork from. He was ordered to pay child support. So that kind of explains why we see her in Norfolk in 1900 and him in Edenton living in someone else's house. And just a year after that, 1900, Joseph married Louise Lassiter, who we then see him in the 1910 census with, and then she dies in 1918. They did not have any children. They were past childbearing. What did we see in 1920? We saw Joseph with a third, Victoria, who was 40 years younger than he. And to my knowledge, they did not have any children. So this timeline for Joseph is building and building. We know he has 4 children. Remember, my goal is to find his descendants. So that's where my interest is, but I have all this other stuff out along the way. So here are a few excerpts from some of the many documents that I have on Joseph. He really was the gift that kept on giving, and that's why he's the one I selected to do this talk on. You can see the 1894 warrant for his abandonment of Hester and the children. And if you look down at the bottom, you will see that he had to pay bond, and then he had to $6 a month for child support. And then on the right, this was one of the earlier articles that I found about him in the newspaper. The town of Edenton had appointed a cemetery committee to address the upkeep of the Black cemeteries, and they had representatives from each of the Black churches, and representatives were called directors. And you can see that J.B. Blunt was a director for the Cage Church. They misspelled it on there. And he was appointed director for the church. Now, I saw Selma on here. Selma, this is the church we visited when you went with me to Edenton. So he was actually a member of this church, and right now this church is undergoing a huge restoration project. I worked very hard to try to talk to someone from this church, but right now they only have a few congregants, and I several calls in and didn't get called back, at least not yet. And I didn't mention this, but this project has ended. So I had to kind of wean myself away from this. If you do this work, you know how addicting it can when there's still so much work to be done, and you know, the project ended. So I have not reached back out yet, but I probably will one day because I feel like they have some answers. Okay, so to this point, I had discovered 5 generations of Joseph's family, one that goes back to his mother, Emma, and then his generation and 3 generations after him. I didn't show you all of that, but I want you to look at it on this tree right now because we're going to see a little bit more about it. So Joseph and Hester have the 4 children, Joshua, Emma, Ida, and Elmira, all born in the 1870s. We see Joshua that he was a carriage blacksmith, which is quite a great job. He was 30 years old and unmarried. And sometimes, you know, we can make somewhat of an inference that it's a possibility that he wasn't interested in women. It's a little unusual to be unmarried at 30 years old at that time. But I don't know that. I just have learned to kind of suspect that when we see people that go later in life and are not married or have any children. Emma did marry. She married a John Henry Miller, and they had one son, John Henry Miller Jr. I was very excited when I found that out because I thought I was going to find a descendant line to come forward. But unfortunately, John Jr. died in 1919 during the Spanish flu pandemic, and he did not even see his 20th birthday. Their daughter Ida married a Charles Darden. She had one daughter, which is the Margaret Bell that we saw in the 1900 census living in the house with her grandmother Hester. And Margaret actually had a baby in 1923, but she was only 5 months pregnant and the baby was stillborn. But they did make a death certificate for it. Elmira married a man named John Southall. It was a very short-lived marriage, and there was no issue. They were divorced just a few years later. So I'm going on and showing you the tree that I've been able to develop for Joseph. Unfortunately, as you can see, it doesn't appear that this family made it, that they died out in the mid to late 1900s, as you'll see in a few minutes, and did carry on to today. You do also see Henry Blunt here, Joseph's father, and we will be talking more about that in just a minute. My time. Ooh, I better talk fast. Okay, so there's a question mark as to whether or not this Henry Blunt is the Henry from the Wake Forest 16, as I call them, and we'll, get to that in a second. So I did everything I could on Joseph, but I needed to turn my attention to Emma because Emma is also part of the Wake Forest 16. So as I've already discussed, she was one of the original enslaved persons named in the inventory. She sold in 1860 for $580, which indicated to me that in 1860, though she was still good for some work, she was probably past the age where they were expecting her to have any more children because she would have been valued higher. She was purchased by a man named John Thompson along with Isaac, whose sale price was similar to hers. It made me think maybe they were a couple or maybe they were siblings, but I really don't know. As you now know, I believe her to be Emma Blunt, born around 1825, which matches the age that I thought this Emma would be, because she would have been about 10 years old at the time of the inventory. We see her first in Norfolk, working in the home of a Cornelia Turner. I've researched her and have not found any connection to this family. She had in the home with her a Margaret Blunt, who was actually born after the sale in 1862. So even though they didn't value her as though she might have another child, she did have a late baby in 1862. It turned out to be her daughter. At first, I thought it was her granddaughter, but it was her daughter. By 1887, both Emma and her daughter Margaret were living in Washington, D.C. They were both doing domestic work, sometimes together, sometimes, especially Margaret, would be living out in the home of whoever she was working for. Emma died September 13th, 1902 in Washington, D.C. So I want you to know that this research is now taking me from Edenton, North Carolina, to Norfolk, Virginia, to Washington, D.C., just for this one family. So one of the approaches that I used and I highly recommend is I created a chart. You can create a chart or a spreadsheet when you are trying to follow someone, see where they were they were there, who was with them, and see if you notice any kind of patterns there. And so I made this residency timeline for Emma and for Margaret Blunt, her daughter, because they always seemed to be together. They were together, they were together in DC. I have them documented in Norfolk in 1880, and that's when she was the servant in the Taylor home. But after that, they are in the Washington, D.C. factory from 1887 all the way to Emma's death. We'll talk about this in a minute, in 1902, and Margaret until her death in 1942, both showing in the Washington, D.C. city directories. And I used these colors to help me see when they were changing addresses. So initially, here they are at 1019 6th Street Southwest. Then for a very long period of time, Emma seems to have a home at 469 L Street Southwest. Right in this period, Margaret is living out, but other than that, this is the home. And then after Emma's death, Margaret's in the house that same year, and so is someone named Ella Blunt, and I don't have the time to talk about that. I'm gonna leave. And after that, that house seems to go away. And Margaret is now living in the homes of the people she's working for until I see her in 1935 and 1940. And at her death in 1942, she's living in the home of a friend. But she's always, with very few exceptions, in Southwest DC. An interesting thing happened in 1900, though. Look at that. Joseph B. Blunt is living, at least at the time the city directory was made, at his mother's house in Washington, D.C. This was one of two things that cinched this case for me, because all along as I was doing this work, I was never 100% sure that this lady that I was following from Norfolk to DC was actually the same Emma Blunt that I knew to be the mother of Joseph. But apparently, after his divorce from Hester, it looks like he was kind of, straggling for, was living with Isaac in this same year, and then he must have gone up to give DC. He was a laborer. He was right there at that 469 L Street Southwest. But I guess he didn't like it, or it didn't work out for some reason, and he went back to Edenton. So try doing something if you're really having trouble keeping up with, the hits that you're getting, and just timeline is not enough. Do a targeted timeline based on whatever thing you're looking at. And for me, it was residency. All right, this is the other thing that helped me. This newspaper article from the Our Colored section of the Fisherman Farmer paper in Edenton, North Carolina. It told me that Mrs. Emma of Washington, D.C. was in Edenton with her son, Mr. J.B. Blunt. So there you have the genealogy. There you have the genealogy. It's right there. I know again that this is mother and son. All right, I was just told I have to rush, so I'm gonna rush. All right, here's the other thing. Newspapers were wonderful for this research. We have Mrs. Ida Darden and daughter of Norfolk are spending a few with father and grandfather, Mr. Joe Blunt, on East Gale Street. This is Joe. He lived on East Gale Street. This is Ida, the child that he had with Hester. So this comes for me again. I'm looking at the right people. This is the right family. I'm going to go really fast now. All right. So as we get ready to get close to the end, I want to talk about the gift of death. I have a quote here from Emily Dickinson. Because I'm not stopped for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held, but just ourselves and immortality. I was going to say more, but this is a picture of Vine Oak Cemetery in Edenton, North Carolina. I took this picture on my last visit there. And this is one of the first burial grounds for the Black people in Edenton. So let's look at death. More help from the newspaper. Here's an article from Health Department in Washington, D.C., showing me death of Emma Blunt, 75 years old. She's the right age. The spelling doesn't matter. This is the Times Herald, Washington, D.C. I held on to this because there were two Emma Blunts, and I didn't know for sure it was her until I saw this. And this is from 1924. In loving remembrance of our dear mother, Emma Blunt, who left us 22 years ago today, September 12, 1902, her loving children, Joseph B. Blunt, Edenton, North Carolina, and Margaret A. Blunt, Washington, D.C. That sealed the deal. I knew I had the people. All right, I am really going to have to fly, so I'm going to tell you this is Joseph's death certificate. We're talking about death here. You can see his name is given as J.B. Blunt. He gives his birth year as 1844, which is accurate. His wife, Victoria, named his father as Henry Blunt. How she knew that, I don't know, but that's why I have the Henry Blunt on the tree. Joe died intestate at age 81. His probate was filed as Blunt. Everything was coming together. His mother, she gives his mother's name as Emma Nixon. I don't know any reason for that. We already know that's not her name, but his wife, Victoria, ended up in the mental hospital for several years, and that is where she died. So who knows what she was talking about. But, and Joanne, if you can please let me just get through this. But I almost lost my love of genealogy because of this article here. I found this after I had finished this project, after I knew I had Joe Blunt. This article is from 1915. Now remember, he died in 1926, according to this death certificate. In 1915, Uncle Joe Blunt, a high respected old colored man, died at his home on Oakham Street, did live there. Uncle Joe was well known and liked by everyone in Edenton. It goes on and it talks about where he worked, all the places he worked. And at the very end, it says he was a member of all the different colored secret societies which attended his funeral in a body. They said he had a funeral. Then why is it that 12 days later, they said Uncle Joe Blunt is not dead as reported. He is much better and is improving. And when I saw that, I was much better and improving too, because I was really about to give up when I saw this. I thought all my work was for nothing. And I had more to say, but I can't say it. And then finally, in 1926, when he actually did die, we get this from the Ledger Star in Norfolk, Virginia. Joe Blunt Colored, who for 50 years had been a janitor at the Methodist Church and for a number of years at the Edenton Graded School, and last year had to retire on account of ill health, died suddenly Saturday morning. He's survived by his wife, which was Victoria, and several children. All right, so this is Margaret in her last census in 1940. She's living in the home of Annie Allen. Here's an article about her death, and it verifies that she was living in the home of a dear friend. It says Annie B. Hart. I don't know what to do with that. The address is correct. It tells us where she's buried. Follow up on that. I had a couple of loose ends that I just wanted to share with you. This is the marriage license for Joe's daughter Elmira and John Southall. They were married June 13, 1899 in Norfolk. They were divorced in June of 1904. And then I think this is the last screen, or it's next to last. This is not Thomas. This is one I'm just using a Library of Congress photo to represent Thomas. But the saga of this research continues because here in 1940 is the last time I see Ida with her husband Charles and the daughter Margaret. And there's someone in the house named Thomas Freedom Freeman, who says is the brother-in-law of the head of household, which would make him Ida's brother. His birth year and everything about him matches that Joshua that we saw, that we never saw again. So I'm wondering if he is Joshua Thomas or Thomas Joshua, and if he chose the name Freeman, I don't know. I have tried to find him. I can't talk about it any longer. All right. And then, oh, this is it. Okay. So I wanted to go back and just say that this Joseph Mardre from Chowan County had one record that interested me, and that was this tax record from 1863-64, where he had a person named Joe, but the Joe was only 12 years old, which means that he would have been probably 8 years old at the time of. That does not match with what we have for Joseph. So my question is, where is Joseph if he was the person that owned him? And where is Pompey? Because he's not there either. Well, here's where Joseph was. I wanted to do this to the end so that we could just all end with a smile on our faces. Our Joseph was in the United States Navy. At the time that this tax record was created, he enlisted as contraband on the ship Brandywine. He got on that ship on July 6, 1863. His enlistment was 2 days before that in Virginia, July 4th, the 4th of July, 1863. He emancipated himself. He also served on the USS New Hampshire, which you see pictured here. He served on the USS George Mangum, and he was discharged August 30th of 1865. And so I say thank you, Joseph, for your service. I'm not going to read this. This is a summary of everything that we did. You can come back and play the video and read all of it on your own. I wanted to say that the genealogical proof standard was used here within the allotted time frame that I had, and that instead of written conclusions, I was asked to make presentations to people at Wake Forest, and so that's what I did, and that anything you've seen might change. I won't read that. You can look at that later, and I'll just let you look at the summary later also, how doing genealogy research is like putting together a puzzle. So thank you for listening. I'm sorry that I ran long. These are all the ways you can contact me. Thank you very much. Sorry, Jawan.
Thank you, Renata, for this wonderful presentation. We can't linger much longer.
My
We're going to have another presentation at 7:15, but I appreciate you for this. And this is absolutely phenomenal research. Gives us all encouragement, gives me encouragement, especially in the type of work that I do. And just in the process of finding these narratives just really keeps hope alive in the research process. So thank you for sharing this with us. I think we've all benefited in some type of way.
My pleasure. And I just have to say that even after all of that, I still don't have anything that tells me he's the Joseph from the Wake Forest 16. But sometimes with our research, we have to make inferences. We have to use circumstantial evidence. And because of the connection to Emma and every fitting into that timeline, I really believe that's the right Joseph and the right Emma, and probably the right Henry also.
Yeah. I think if nothing else, it shows your persistence in this research.
Yeah. And thank you and Shelley for all the support along the way. Unfortunately, Morris has not wanted to invest in further research, so my formal affiliation with them has ended. But as a researcher, I can't just. There's too many loose ends, so I've still got to go back to it at some point. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And we have no questions in the chat, but we want to, of course, you can reach Renate Yarborough Sanders via the information she provided. We have our final Lemon Project Summer Sankofa series workshop next month. So join us then, sign up. And again, thank you all for joining us and have a good weekend. Thank you, Renata, for for this phenomenal presentation.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for coming, everyone. All right, thank you. Let me get this chat real